Okay, class, today we're working on section 6.3, and we're kind of going in progression here. Yesterday we learned how to multiply fractions, and today we're going to learn how to divide. Now, it kind of goes back to those basic rules for dividing fractions in elementary school, and we learned, if you look at my writing here, that dividing is equivalent to multiplying by the reciprocal. So if you remember last year in 7th grade, we had this little thing that we called keep. Okay, we called keep. And then we change. And then we flip. Okay, so it was keep, change, flip. That doesn't look so good. Let's try it a little bit differently. Okay, so we tried this little thing, keep. And then we would change our division to a multiplication, and then we would flip it. We would multiply by the reciprocal. All right? So that's kind of what's going on here as you look at my letters A, B, and C. So I keep the first one, this changed, and then I multiplied by the reciprocal. Now, our battle cry is still the same. We're going to have to see if there's anything that we can factor and then cancel. So my little light bulb says, always remember, follow your order of operations and factor when possible. So that means the factoring honey-do list is, yes, still in play. Very important to watch for the GCF. Factor your difference of perfect squares. Remember, difference of perfect squares becomes conjugates, or Mrs. Burton calls that sum and difference. Okay? And also factor your trinomials. And again, we're going to get those two binomials by using our good friend X factor. All right, so now let's see how that's going to look for us when we do a problem. Now, these are long and drawn out. There's a lot of writing going on. So if we look at number 1, problem number 1, it says to give your answer in simplest form after we divide. So now we got to remember some things. When I'm going to go through, and first thing I need to do is I need to take equation number 1 and rewrite it as multiplication. Well, in order for me to do that, okay, if I'm going to rewrite it as multiplication, I take the first fraction, and I write it exactly as it is. My division became multiplication, and here is my, and then I multiplied by the reciprocal. So keep, change, flip. Then I've got to look at each one, and I've got to go through and use my factoring honey-do list. So if I look at the very first numerator, well, I realize, hey, that's got a GCF. So if you notice, I factor out a 2, and I'm left with 3n minus 1. When I look at that first denominator, well, it's a monomial. It's in its lowest form. There's no GCF, so I'm done with that. If I go to the next fraction and I look at the numerator, well, it's just 27. That's in its lowest form. And then if I look at that second fraction's denominator, there's no GCF, so I'm pretty much finished there. So now, what can we cancel? Remember, we kind of learned that we're going to see what we can factor using our honey-do list, and then we go back through and see what we can cancel, and we may be able to simplify a fraction along the way. So let's look at our factored form. That starts here. Well, did you notice I have a 3n minus 1 in the numerator and a 3n minus 1 in the denominator? Now, do you see something else we can do? Yeah, did you realize I can simplify this fraction here? That it can become a 1, and this can become a 3. I just took 2 over 6 and reduced it to 1/3, and now this 3 will cross-cancel with this 27 and give me a 9. Now, you got to be very careful and kind of write neat so you can see what's going on. So what's left in the numerator? Well, I've got a 1, this is canceled, so I'm left with a 9. What's left in my denominator? Well, the only thing I have left in my denominator is n. So that's my final answer. Now, once again, when we're dividing, we don't have to worry about restrictions. The directions are going to say restrictions are assumed, and so we don't have to worry about them. Okay, so we're going to find out a whole lot of factoring going on. We're pretty much doing the exact same thing we did yesterday, except we've got to remember to multiply by the reciprocal, then we're going to factor, and then we're going to cancel. So let's look at number 2. If I look at my first the numerator of the first one, okay? First thing we got to remember to do, though, is we have to remember to rewrite it as a multiplication problem. So if I go down here and I rewrite it as a multiplication problem, see, let me get this over here some more. Okay, I'm going to rewrite it as a multiplication problem, and so I multiplied by the reciprocal. We flip this one, and now we've got to go down here and we've got to factor a whole lot of things. So if I look at the first one here, that's 3 terms, so I'm going to have to x factor. All right, and so hopefully you realize that that's going to become x minus 5, x plus 4. And then we're going to look at the denominator of the first fraction. Oh yes, I have a GCF. So if I factor out the GCF, I'm down here, and I have 5 parentheses x minus 5. And then we're going to go over here to our next fraction, and we look at the numerator, and there's 2 terms there. Ooh, guess what that is? Difference of perfect squares, okay? And so we know that I need conjugates on that. So that's where my x plus 5, x minus 5 came from. And then in that second denominator, we got 3 terms, so we have to x factor. All right? And so when I go to x factor, I get x plus 5, x minus 1. So that's my denominator. Now, we can finally go through, what can we cancel? Well, if you notice, I have an x minus 5 here and an x minus 5 here. I've got an x plus 1 here, an x plus 5 and an x plus 5. And when I look around, I think that's it. That's the only binomials that'll cancel. There were no, and so now what do we have left? Okay, so we've got x plus 4 times x minus 5. That's what's left in my numerator. And the only thing left in my denominator is that 5 times x minus 1. Now, hopefully, factoring all these polynomials should come very easy by now, because we've been doing that for almost a month. Okay? And so, remember, for division, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, I think I have 2 more, and let's see what happens. Okay, if you look at number 3, well, the first thing I need to do, remember, we're going to take this problem and we're going to rewrite it as a multiplication problem. So in order for me to do that, I've got the whole thing written out here. Okay, in order for me to do that, I change my division to multiplication, and then I multiply by the reciprocal. So if you noticed, they switch signs. Now, I had to factor. Okay, now my first fraction right here, I couldn't do anything in the numerator or the denominator. It was in lowest terms. When we went to the second fraction, did you realize both of those were difference of perfect squares? Yeah, so we've got to get our conjugates here, okay, on both of those. And now, what will cancel? Well, my 2x minus y cancels, my 2y minus x cancels, and this is what is left. That is my final answer. All right, so let's look at number 4. And if I look at number 4, remember the first thing we have to do, and I think I'll actually write this one out. It's going to take a little bit of room, but we'll get it done. Take the first one, okay, and we're going to 2 minus 11x plus 12 over 27 minus 18x, and we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So that's why I'm flipping the second one. Okay, so now let's do this one together. When I look at my very first numerator, I've got 3 terms. How do I factor 3 terms? Yep, x factor. Now, do I have a GCF there? No. So I'm going to go over here and extra space, and I'm going to x factor. So what are my factors of 2x? We've got 1 and 2, x and x. If I look at my signs, both of these are negative. Now, I need the factors of 12. Am I going to use 1 and 12, 2 and 6, or 3 and 4? Well, some of you might think right away 1 and 12, but that's not going to work because both of my signs have to be negative. We figured that out. So it's got to be 3 and 4, and I think it's going to go this way. And let's x factor to make sure that we've factored correctly. We've got to check the middle. So that's going to give me negative 3x. And when I cross multiply negative 4 times 2x, that gives me negative 8x. Hey, guess what? We found it. Okay, so that means this numerator is going to become x minus 4, and then it's going to be 2x minus 3. Now, if I look at this denominator, I've got a GCF. Hopefully you realize it's a 9, and then I'm going to be left with 3 minus 2x. And now I'm over here on the second fraction, and we're up here in the numerator, and I have a GCF. Yes, we're going to factor out a 6 and an x, and I'm left with x squared minus 16. Well, hopefully right away you're going to say, wait a minute, Mrs. Burton, x squared minus 16, that's difference of perfect squares, so it can factor again and become x plus 4, x minus 4. And then in the second denominator, we're going to factor out an x squared as my GCF, and we're left with x plus 4. So you see what Mrs. Burton said? There's a whole lot of factoring going on. All right, so now what can we cancel? Well, when I look through here, I've got, when I look, there's x minus 4 is in the numerator on both sides here, so I can't factor that out. This one's in the numerator, and that one's in the numerator, so I can't cross-cancel them. I've got this 2x minus 3. Did you realize those guys right there were opposites? 2x minus 3, 3 minus 2x. So in order to make them cancel, I got to multiply by negative 1. Now, did you notice I've got a 6 and a 9? So we're going to make this a 2 and this a 3. And then the only thing we have left is these x's. So if you can put it together, what do we have left? Well, in the numerator, and then I just realized I can cancel out that x plus 4's. So what do I have left in the numerator? Well, I've got x minus 4 times x minus 4, which gives me x minus 4 squared. And then I've got a 2 left in front of that. And in the denominator, there's a 3. And then it looks like the only thing left is my x. All right, so that is my final answer. Okay, so let's look at number 5, and then we'll say we're done. If we look at number 5, well, order of operations says that I need to take care of this, okay? So hopefully you know 2c cubed. Remember, the cubed on the outside goes to everybody on the inside. We've got 8c cubed, and we're going to put that over 1 times 3c over d. And then did you notice I got division? So I've got to multiply that by the reciprocal, and so I flip it. Now, what can we cancel? Well, I can cancel my d's. Did you see that? Oh, did you see I have a c cubed here and a c cubed here? Now, what else can I do? Oh, well, this 3 can become a 1, and 3 goes into 6 too. So now what do I have left? Well, in the numerator, I have an 8 left and a c. And in the denominator, if you look, I have a 2 left, and so that gives me 4c. I think we'll stop there for today. Okay, you can start working on your homework.